Helen Christians, and I'll be your MC this morning. I'd like to welcome you to the Sunday morning meeting of the Humanists of Greater Portland. The Humanists of Greater Portland is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a democratic and ethical life stance that affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their own lives. Humanism stands for the building of a more humane society through an ethics based on natural values in a spirit of reason and free inquiry. Our topic at today's meeting, Portland Harbor Community Coalition that works towards the cleanup of our rivers, addresses several humanist commitments, especially environmentalism, responsibility, and altruism. Al Christians is our reader this morning. Welcome, Al. Good morning.
Okay, our reading today is another one from the book, The Practical Cogitator, which I read from a few weeks back. And this one is from George Sarton, who lived from 1884 to 1956. And this is from a book he wrote in 1924 called The New Humanism, which it predates, by about 6 years, the founding of the American Humanist Association. So it's not the same New Humanism as American Humanist Association brought in. Sarton was a historian, one of the pioneers of the history of science. He was 30 years old living in Belgium when World War I happened, and he fled Belgium. He actually got official permission from the Germans to leave, but the conditions were that you couldn't take anything with you. So he left Belgium and went to, I think first to England and later to the United States, where he taught as a historian and philosopher. And his idea of the new humanism was that there could be some kind of happy merger of the liberal arts and the sciences into a system that would sustain a viable philosophy of life for the modern age. And this is an excerpt from that book. Sarton writes, "Popular resistance has been especially strong against religious reformers and men of science. That saints and scientists should thus be placed in a single category by the opposition of others is far more than a casual occurrence. They have much in common, above all, their otherworldliness. There are but few saints among scientists as among other men, but truth itself is a goal comparable to sanctity. As the Pythagoreans had already understood it more than 24 centuries ago, there is sanctity in pure knowledge as there is in pure beauty, and the disinterested quest of truth is perhaps the greatest purification. However, the hostility to saints and to investigators was not altogether of the same kind. Attempts at religious reform aroused popular anger because the inborn conservativeness of man is nowhere stronger than in the field of religion. The religion of his fathers must not be criticized, even if his own profession of it is but an outward show. The most malicious kind of hatred is that which is built upon a theological foundation. On the other hand, the resistance to scientific novelties was due to an intuitive, if unconscious, appreciation of their revolutionary nature. The slightest and most innocent scientific innovation is but a wedge which is bound to penetrate deeper and deeper, and the advance of which will soon be impossible to resist. Conservative people are undoubtedly right in their distrust and hatred of science, for the scientific spirit is the very spirit of innovation and adventure, the most reckless kind of adventure into the unknown. And such is its aggressive strength that its revolutionary activity can neither be restrained nor restricted within its own field. Sooner or later, it will go out to conquer other fields and to throw floods of light into all the dark places where superstition and injustice are still rampant. The scientific spirit is the greatest force for construction, but also for destruction.
Thank you, Will. That was lovely. Lovely. I really like your introduction too, to explain your reading. Thank you so much for doing that. I would like to now welcome today's speaker, Cassie Cohen. Ms. Cohen serves as Executive Director for Portland Harbor Community Coalition. She has over 15 years of experience working in the nonprofit, education, and in the public sector. From 2009 to 2015, she led Groundwork Portland, an environmental justice organization led by and serving communities of color, during which time they formed the Portland Harbor Community Coalition. She and her team were also able to employ 100 young people in environmental jobs and training. Cassie would like to take questions during her presentation. Please put your questions into the chat and I'll read them to Cassie, or you can put in your name and I'll call you when it's your turn to ask a question. Welcome, Cassie, and come on in and begin your program. So thankful that you're here this morning.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and it's great to see everyone. I would like to start. I think a nice way to begin some of our meetings over the years, we've begun this way to ask everyone to sort of take a moment and think and reflect a bit about what your connection, what your relationship to water is, whether it's a particular body of water, or here where you live now, or maybe where you grew up, if it was not here, somewhere else, and kind of the meaning you draw from that connection to a body of water or water in general. So feel free to put your personal, thought in the chat, and we can sort of like take a look at what everyone says when we're around in a room. So usually we have monthly meetings when it wasn't pre-COVID, and we would sit in a circle and then we would go around and everyone would share. But we probably don't have time for that today. But thank you. I'll just give folks a quiet moment for a second to do that. Lake Erie, growing up in Buffalo, says Helen, and now the Willamette River. Joyce says, love hiking near a stream or the ocean. Reminds her that she's more than 90% water. Yes. Fabulous. And so we can, as folks keep thinking and posting, we can check it out throughout the next hour. But it's nice because it starts to make everyone realize that how critical water is, and how critical water is to where people have congregated since time immemorial. And it's always been near bodies of water, right? For survival purposes. And so it runs deep, right? So again, my name is Cassie, and I was born in Portland. I grew up south of Portland in Lake Grove and Lake Oswego, but my father worked in Portland in North Portland in a hospital, and so I would come. I spent quite a bit of time growing up noticing the distinctions between and the disparities between where I was living in the trees in Southwest versus Northeast Portland, for a lot of Black and brown folks and people with lower incomes. And it's begun to struck me as I became, I think, more in high school, college years, that something wasn't quite right there. That there was some level of injustice around how natural resources and access to kind of a healthy environment where you live was distributed. And so I ended up getting my master's of social work in community-based practice. I ended up working for the city of Portland's community visioning project, Vision PDX, as my during my final year, and then went on to work there for a while, and ended up meeting many different community-based organizations through that process, but then found out about this small environmental justice startup group called Groundwork Portland in 2009, and applied for this job and got it. And I never really knew that it never occurred to me that I would do environmental work, to be honest. I knew I wanted to work with communities, and I sort of work on a change level at on a community-wide level if I could. I knew I didn't want to do like therapy, one-on-one therapy or direct service work as a social worker, but this fell into my lap. This type of work fell into my lap. Groundwork Portland was doing community-based redevelopment of brownfield sites. So that's like properties that are potentially contaminated, either, old former gas stations or dry cleaner sites that tend to be vacant in your neighborhood. If you have some of these vacant sites, you usually suspect something is going on that's complicated at that site. And so back in 2012, a couple of community leaders, when I was at Groundwork Portland, a couple of community leaders approached our organization to say they had some grave concerns about the cleanup of the river, of the Willamette River, and that there was a process heating up around, kind of a major decision with the river cleanup, and that they felt our organization was positioned to not only, kind of start working on the issue, but to mobilize especially disproportionately impacted communities, because we had begun to build a track record of having leadership. So our board of directors was majority people of color at the time. The folks that we were serving and the staff, majority of the staff, minus myself, I consider myself white, Jewish descent, but majority of our leadership, and we were serving majority people of color at the time. And so anyway, we started to explore this issue because none of us knew anything about it. We're like, what is Portland Harbor? What is Portland Harbor Superfund? We don't know. So we started reaching out to Willamette River Keepers, Audubon Society of Portland, the tribes. The 6 tribes have treaty rights to the Willamette River. It is Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Grand Ronde, Umatilla, Siletz, Nez Perce, Yakima, and I'm forgetting one. Warm Springs. Did I say Warm Springs? Okay, Warm Springs. So those are the 6.
Say Warm Springs.
Yeah, 6 tribes that have government to government consultation rights and formal roles in the cleanup of the river. So we consulted all of them as well, and other community groups that had been approached back in 2012 by a group of these some of the potentially responsible parties that knew that they would be on the hook for cleanup. They had been approached to do some focus groups at the time. Urban League, URCO, I don't know if you've heard of some of these groups, Latino Network, received some funding from these responsible parties to do focus groups around the Superfund site, because they were about to release what's called this feasibility study. So we brought all these groups together and just started having a conversation, like what's going on, and is there a need, is there a gap here to do some, some more community work around this. And unanimously folks said, yeah, we think there is a need for it. So that's the origin story of Portland Harbor Community Coalition. And we really got going in 2012 and centering around disproportionately impacted communities. So our whole kind of focus is on that. There is also another group called the Portland Harbor Community Advisory Group. Every Superfund site that's federally designated by Environmental Protection Agency as national priority cleanup sites is required to set up EPA sets up these community advisory groups. So back in 2000, a group of dedicated volunteers from mostly North Portland, where, that's closest to this area of the river, began convening at that time, and they still exist, but it's but the distinction between their group and our group is that we create a safe space for community to come together and to determine what our priorities are, what our concerns are, and then go back to the responsible parties, go back to the agencies, the regulatory agencies, and say, this is how we want to engage in the process. And this is our perspective, and these are our sets of demands. So in the community advisory group, they also have monthly meetings, but they're a little more open, and so you tend to get contractors that are making money and getting work in the cleanup process, or folks who represent the responsible parties or polluters as well that come into those meetings. So it's good for for one purpose, but you also need that safe space for a community to kind of get organized as well. So that's the role that we play, and we convene, and we collaborate with the CAG members as well. But we are our unique organization called Portland Harbor Community Coalition. And I do have some slides I'd like to share, so I can. Any questions so far, though?
No questions yet, but we've got some really sweet, I'll read a few of them.
Great.
Let's see. Joyce Lackey loves hiking near a stream or the ocean, reminds me that she's 90% water. Reminds that she's 90% water if I have that percentage right. Dave McMillan, I row weekly on the Willamette River in Salem and Independence. Dave DiNucci, as a kid, it was mostly Columbia Gorge, Blue Lake, and Johnson Creek. Suzanne enjoys our Willamette walking across the bridges. LC, my affection for water is strong. When I was 18, I was struck by diabetes, which, while untreated, produces a memorable, intense, and perpetual thirst. Gail writes, grew up near the Pacific in SoCal, love the ocean. Sue Pierce, in my teens, we swam and ran class 1 and 2 rapids in inner tubes in North Fork and Clearwater River of north central Idaho. We lived 2 blocks from the municipal pool, but much preferred the river. Gretchen writes, fishing and swimming in Lake Erie as a youngster, scuba and snorkeling, the view over the ocean on Oahu, I can't say it, Oahu, the kayak trip in the San Juans, birds splashing in my bird bath, daily showers, cooking, the sound of rain falling, the smell of rain in the city, in the woods, wanting rain when it hasn't fallen for a long time. Lori, grew up swimming in oceans and lakes in California and water skiing. Still swim and kayak in all our rivers and lakes in this area, but toxic algae seems to be everywhere this year. Several years ago, attended a series of public meetings concerning Willamette cleanup to get info and give input. Mike Brichet, being the proverbial bag of hammers. I'm lousy at water sports, but I'm thinking of buying a small place on the Oregon coast since I have always enjoyed beach trips. So you have definitely stirred some wonderful memories, Cassie. But yeah, go ahead and do your slides, and I think we'll have some. I think we're ready to. And everybody's, if you have a question about what Cassie's speaking to us so far, start putting in your questions, and she'll do her slideshow now.
Great. And I'll just add real quick. I will get to your question really for sure. So like I said, I grew up south of Portland, but I did not have a deep relationship with the Willamette River. And I really didn't critically think about why or why not until I started learning more about the toxic legacy of the Willamette River as an adult, and getting into this work, and realized when I was growing up, I was fortunate to be able to get out into nature and go camping with my family, but we didn't swim in the Willamette River. We didn't drink from the Willamette River. We didn't really, recreate so much on the Willamette River. So, it kind of all is starting to make sense to me now, why maybe there was a hesitation, on my family's part. So let's go to the next slide. So I wanted to explore, where are we in the here and now? And there's more, that could be added to this list, but we are in an kind of, well, definitely, the last, 4 or 5 years, we were in an era of deregulation of policies that protect our environment and people too, right? Environmental health policies. We are in an era of where, industrial pollution and development has been happening for decades, and regulation has only been in place, for less time, and industry sometimes tends to influence regulation as well, because of their power and their financial position and their lobbying. So we have ongoing exposure of toxins in the environment, kind of really all over the place, that can cause cancer or other harmful effects to people and animals. And but there is a little, we hold out an ounce of hope, because there has been quite a bit of movement finally, after over 20 years, towards a cleanup of this Portland Harbor Superfund site. So let me tell you where the boundaries are. Portland Harbor Superfund spans from the south end of it is kind of between the Broadway Bridge and the Fremont Bridge. And then it's 10 miles all the way up to the south end of Sauvie Island. So the north edge ends 1 mile marker before the confluence of the Columbia River and the Willamette River. Portland Harbor Superfund was designated as a Superfund site by EPA back in 2000. And even prior to that, there was years of conversations between the state and EPA about that, and the tribes. Yakima Nation, I think I forgot to mention Yakima Nation. They are one of the 6 tribes that have treaty rights to fish and, gather other, harvest other species in the Willamette River. They had hopes of the boundary of the Portland Harbor extending into the Columbia River, because there are pretty serious contaminants in the lower Columbia River as well. If you can imagine, it flows, toxins flow that direction. But EPA decided to not do that. So that's the boundaries, and they spent a good 16 years conducting research and sampling. And really, the way it works is that it's called the PRPs, the potentially responsible parties. They are the ones in charge of doing that, conducting that research. So they took probably about 4 times as long as they should have to finally conclude a feasibility study that had an environmental risk assessment and a health risk assessment and all sorts of other things in there. Probably a 1,000-page document. You can find it on EPA's website, and if you they have a summary as well. And that that was submitted in 2016. And then EPA ended up having to change the feasibility study because there were some major inaccuracies in the risk assessments. So there was a back and forth there for some time, and I think some of the PRPs were fined by EPA because they were unwilling to make those changes for a while. But there was a public comment period eventually, because EPA, after finalizing that feasibility study, EPA came out with a proposed cleanup plan. So the proposed cleanup plan at the time rolled out in early, I think, 2017, and that cleanup plan was to basically remove 8%, I think. I think it was 8% of the, kind of the most serious contamination. You may imagine that community folks that we were working with at the time were not very satisfied with that solution or with that proposal. So at the time, we sort of galvanized a public comment effort to challenge EPA's proposed cleanup plan, and said that we wanted a robust cleanup of the Superfund site, and we ended up generating the most public comments for a proposed cleanup plan, I think, on the entire West Coast for any Superfund site. 5,300 comments. It wasn't just our group, it was many groups that organized at that time. And we were able to convince EPA to increase the cleanup substantially. They landed on a plan that definitely was not as robust as community members had hoped, but it's definitely way better than what they were proposing. So that's where we are. We've started in the cleanup process. Currently, it's called we're in the phase that's called the remedial design phase. So there's more sampling being done, and there's more studies occurring on kind of what the actual strategies are going to be. This is just a really long process. So that's why, it's helpful for groups like you to hear about it so you can keep tabs on it and, kind of weigh in ultimately when a critical decision is coming. And sometimes they throw surprises at us, and I'll talk more about that later. Are there any questions so far before I jump into this slide?
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
We have a question from Willie. When there is a water cleanup, where does the waste go?
So the cleanup there's different methodologies for cleanup, and they usually, for a Superfund site and a river, well, the primary contaminants are in the sediments that rest on the bottom of the river. So those sediments either will be dredged and treated and removed to a hazardous waste facility, or will be capped in some way, covered with some sort of a material, or will be consolidated in some type of facility that they construct, although that is not a popular plan for the people, for sure, because usually folks just want it out of there. Or they do what's called natural recovery or enhanced natural recovery, which basically means that they leave it in place and monitor it every 5 years and hope that natural processes either kind of wash it away or reduce the pollution, dilute the pollution over time. But there's a lot of skepticism around that as well. So those are the alternatives, and definitely the most serious contaminated areas will be dredged and hauled away to hazardous waste facilities that are designated, so there's a couple in the region, right? So Arlington is a major one in Eastern Oregon. There's one in Hillsborough as well. And, there's a whole debate and dialogue to talk about with regard to, how to deal with waste that's in your own backyard that, settlers, from industry came and polluted the land. And is it equitable? Is it just to place it in another community? So that's a whole, much bigger, broader conversation to have. And unfortunately, there's no easy solution to just make it disappear. Although there's trials, and I can even talk about one. We can talk about some bioremediation that we've been testing out with some other partners for a section of this kind of the upland area. Okay. So these are some of the priorities over many years, with dialogues from all of these different intersectional sort of communities coming together and talking about their common concerns and issues, and based on their values and where they come from and their lived experiences. These are some of the common broad stroke themes that have come up over the years around what people want to see happen over time, right? So ideally, a river that's safe for people, fish, and wildlife. Greater access to the river in this area because it's so heavily industrialized, and that's really been the kind of default priority for long-range planning, for zoning code priorities, for development, for the marketplace, and for 100 plus years. And so just even in the last 50 years, 60 years, folks used to have so much more access to fishing holes, along the river that has really disappeared. People have really, we have some 80-year-old folks who, from the Black community, for example, who as kids would be going down to the river in North Portland and all over the region, but also North Portland. And Swan Island used to be a habitat, for example. So, and it's totally gone. So that's an environmental injustice, right? Is to cut people off from access to the river. So how can you start to create a more balance, so that, maybe you sustain jobs, in industry, but find industry that's not so harmful to the environment or to workers or to people, or wildlife, and also sort of intermix salmon habitat and other things, and access for recreation. But also this cleanup, this particular Portland Harbor Superfund cleanup, is expected to probably end up being over $1 billion. And since it is such a massive undertaking, for communities who have put some thinking into this, they want to see this done in a way that is, not business as usual, right? They want to see this actually benefit local contractors, local workers, especially those contractors and workers that tend to get left out of opportunities for major infrastructure projects, but to be able to build capacity for minority contractors or women-owned firms, or people of color, and women and folks coming out of maybe the justice system, or formerly homeless or houseless folks, to be able to get jobs training and job opportunities and career pathways, and to actually bring some wealth into this region, so that we can help get us out of the crises that we are in currently, right? So this is one of the visions, and then also just ongoing, trying to chip away at the secrecy around Superfund. So Superfund is inherently designed to be a confidential process between the potentially responsible parties, their lawyers, and they tend to spend a lifetime kind of haggling over what percentage of liability they should have. And and then their relationship with the regulatory agency, with EPA, and usually community is an afterthought. Usually community folks get information once the plans are already pretty much decided. So we are really trying to challenge that whole protocol, and to insert community voices, especially from disproportionately impacted communities, into every step of the cleanup process, every little decision making kind of milestone prior to that milestone coming. And so we've had quite a bit of success around it, but it is a major uphill battle, because this is a Superfund policy, is a national policy that is part of the Civil Rights Act, and it's just designed in that way. So
Cassie, we have a question.
Yes.
What I believe what I understood you saying is that the potentially responsible parties, which also is another word for polluters,
Yes.
are the ones that do the research. Did I
right.
misunderstand you when you said
did
that?
not misunderstand. Here's the issue. So actually, right now, Earl Blumenauer, Congressman Blumenauer, and I think other Congress people are trying to pass, like every legislative session, they try to reenact the Superfund tax. So in the 90s, the tax on industry was taken away. So the Superfund program used to actually be funded based on this tax that, where polluters would pay in, a fee basically, to pay for this program. So there was more, more capacity from the federal government to just sort of do the process or of cleaning up sites and take initiative. But because that's no longer there, it's sort of a polluters pay model in a different way. So polluters have to pay for everything. They even pay EPA, for EPA staff. They pay to do the analysis, the feasibility study. I mean, this site is one of the most complicated Superfund sites in the nation because there are around 150 responsible parties, potentially responsible parties. Some of those are Fortune 500 companies, Chevron, BP. Some are utilities, Northwest Natural, PGE. Some are local businesses, Schnitzer, Vigor, Daimler. It's kind of every company that's ever had a history of being there on the river in the past 100 years or is currently there is liable in some way, right? And their insurance companies. So, but also the public agencies. So there's the Port of Portland, the City of Portland, the State Department of Lands. So that's been the most challenging piece is all of those different parties, negotiating with each other. And then, some of those parties have stepped up during different points in this process, and they have been, some have been more responsible than others. And, there's not, so for example, there was there was a process that where EPA was looking at changing the level of toxicity of one contaminant in the that would affect the cleanup level. So there was a group of PRPs that stepped up, and there ended up being so much controversy around it because of the process of EPA selecting these. And I think this was right when maybe there was a change of administration from Obama to Trump. So anyway, so much controversy that EPA ended up feeling like they needed to have 100% oversight of their work in the field. So for the 2-year duration that they were doing research and sampling and looking at the sediment and the fish in the river, for that, EPA was monitoring the process literally every time they went out. And then at the end, they submitted their report, and EPA ruled that, the content, the research was quality research that they conducted, but their interpretation of the research was problematic. And so the interpretation, kind of like their conclusion and their recommendations, that of course they put a, kind of a press release out and everything. were to basically unravel the whole record of decision, the whole cleanup plan, so it turned out they really they stepped up to do that as a way to get out of their responsibility for cleaning up the river, right? But EPA, all they could do is kind of monitor the research to make sure it was properly done and then make their own conclusion at the end of the day. And so they said, no, we're not going to undo the cleanup plan. Thank you for your research, and we're moving forward. So it's not always that cut and dry either.
The EPA is the polluters. I mean, it sounds like that they're much more in favor of the polluters than they are in cleaning up the river if they threw out the research.
Yeah, they didn't. So what they did is that they said, this research is helpful, but what your recommendations are, we're not accepting your recommendations for undoing the cleanup plan. We're going to move forward with the cleanup plan, integrate, the good parts of the research.
Okay.
David.
Oh yeah, Dave McMillan has a question. Yeah, dredging is very disruptive to fish and wildlife in the river. How do they mitigate the effects of sediment in the water flowing downstream and protect the creatures on the bottom? I assume the Department of Fish and Wildlife, as well as the DEQ, is involved.
So basically the dredging, and it's better to talk with EPA about it, but they have a whole, they need to propose. So basically all the design of the cleanup is happening right now. We're in, in the next like 2-3 years, this is exactly the type of thing that they're looking at, is how to work around the migratory times for salmon and trout, for example, and to not do cleanup during those periods of time. Mm-hmm. And there's also kind of been a tension over many years for what dredging equipment should be used, and of course community members, once they learn about the latest, greatest, most innovative dredging technology that disrupts the soil the least, they want that. Mm-hmm. They want that for their river, they want that for their fish and for the people and health and all that. But EPA doesn't necessarily mandate, the latest, greatest technology, and it takes them a lot longer to catch up, really. Mm-hmm. Government. So, and a lot of all the contracting, once the cleanup begins, the contracting is left up to the polluters, because they are the ones paying for the cleanup. So EPA doesn't get to choose the contractors. So we are hoping that, we're kind of like keeping our fingers crossed that one of the public agencies takes the lead as the performing party, so we can hold them accountable more, because we feel we'll have a little bit of an easier time holding them accountable to higher standards for cleanup than some of the industrial parties.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, it's not, it's not a given that there will be no disruption, but EPA tends to like reassure the community that, they have a safe way to do it. But, I think there have been flawed cleanup projects many times before this, right? And so that's the community oversight component that we are fighting for, is to say, hey, EPA, you're great. However, you're limited. Your budget's been cut over many years. Monitoring every 5 years doesn't cut it for us. We want to be on the street, mm-hmm. kind of looking in our own neighborhood to see how things are going, and to have an actual, kind of formal committee, oversight committee, kind of even a binding agreement around the terms of the cleanup and the and how that can proceed, and what what metrics determine success, a successful cleanup, you know?
Yes.
So anyway, let's go on to the next. So these are our, you know, just kind of some thoughts about, you know, strategy, you know, and kind of like how can we create change around this process? Because if it's business as usual, typically how it goes is that these national contractors come in from out of state and get hired by whoever the performing parties will be to do the cleanup, because they, you know, hop around from Superfund site to Superfund site. So they bring their crews from out of state, and they don't necessarily have, you know, good workers' rights standards in terms of how they treat their workers. And they tend not to necessarily have values around providing jobs to locals, right? So that's something that we really want to shift. So, you know, I mean, the way that we, you know, kind of view our internal success as a coalition is to increase our membership, and to from doing that build community power, because we don't have the financial resources. I don't know if you're familiar, but environmental justice, well, environmentalism, conservationalism is funded less than, for example, arts and maybe other community or social service type, you know, organizations in the foundation world. Environmental justice organizations are funded even less than environmental and conservation organizations by far. So that gives you hopefully some perspective on how we are, you know, I mean, we welcome, you know, folks who want to contribute financially, but also, you know, just like people power to us is really critical, because that's the only way we can build our capacity to get the change we want. You know, forums like this help us to get the word out about it, because, you know, we feel like it's, unfortunately, that you know, even though I worked for the city at one point, but it really is kind of by design that the city of Portland has left Portlanders, ratepayers, and taxpayers in the dark about the Portland Harbor Superfund site, because they wear these two hats, because the city of Portland is liable in a pretty major way, we think, for cleanup. So they've had a whole team of lawyers over the years, you know, working on this issue, but it's really only since our organization started knocking on their door in, you know, in 2013, 14, 15, 16, to say, hey, city, it's not okay. You need to you need to be informing the public about what you're doing, and your responsibility, and how you are participating in this cleanup process. And because we are voters, because we are taxpayers, you should be reflecting our values, right? The city should be putting forth our values in how they interact with EPA and the whole process. So we have since then convinced the city to create a community grants program for Portland Harbor. They've created it's I think about 2 years old now. The in Bureau of Environmental Services, they have a Portland Harbor program to engage the community. They have one staff person they hired to solely do public involvement now. And, you know, they're trying. They're starting to change how they interface with the community. it looks like there's a comment from.
There's a comment
Mhm.
from Willie. I have a friend who used to work in a plant that was on the Columbia River. They were always notified when a pollution test was going to be done, and the company would just change their activities that day so they would test well.
That's great. See, so Willie, your kind of experience and this testimony and kind of sharing that type of experience could actually be quite critical in ensuring that, we end up having a cleanup process that is like authentic, that that happens without all sorts of helpful. And I think please let's stay in touch, because I mean, that your experience could be so helpful, could be really, really helpful to this process.
I just want to know why they were informed when they were going to be tested.
Yeah, that's a good
Who
point.
would have informed them?
Your guess is as good as mine. My guess is it was, because potentially, but in this case, they're testing the actual sediment in the river, but yeah, we would hope to have like some, more robust inspections or oversight mechanisms. Not really sure exactly how it should be designed, but if folks have ideas around that. Currently, what we're doing is we are working on generating a draft of a community benefits agreement. Community benefits agreements typically are tools that are used in major development construction projects. In this town, it's been utilized. In other cities, it's been even more utilized by communities who are concerned that like a major development project is going to disrupt their community or displace or gentrify or have some negative impact. They put forward a set of demands to the developer, sometimes to the government agency that's involved and other parties, and then they negotiate what the terms of that agreement looks like. And that can have different components to it. One key component is what I mentioned, that community oversight committee. And eventually, these types of agreements will have all the parties as signatories, and that would sign on eventually. So community groups can be signatories. And so that's a potential role for your organization in the future, if you care to continue to like oversee and monitor how this cleanup process goes. We've also been successful in having making some changes around how the cities and the state and the port and metro regional government does their procurement process for the remedial design. So, for example, the port of Portland did start. They had to hire a contractor, maybe subcontractor, to start their early cleanup or remedial design process. And we were able to convince them to share with us their draft request for proposal before they sent it out to contractors for bidding. We were able to convince the port to include some language in there around, I forget, social justice or community benefits, or some language in there. And then in the next procurement process that the city, state, port went in on together in an agreement with EOA, we were able to convince them to have not only to co-create a request for proposal before putting it out for bidding, but to actually have a community member serve on the RFP evaluation committee. Okay. So, and then the next procurement process, we were able to convince them to have 2 community members serve, and actually not just serve on an RFP evaluation committee, but get compensated for their time on that committee. So we've begun to actually change the internal way that the Port of Portland, at least, who's been kind of the lead for procurement for all of these processes, the way that they go about their procurement process as an agency, because they've piloted this more than once, and it's been wildly successful, and they're very excited about it, and it's proved to be beneficial to them and to community folks, because all parties agree on how to make procurement less biased, more fair, and just to provide opportunities for setting a new standard for how in the marketplace, really, to send signals to contractors that there's a different way to go about business, to involve community, for example, or to have diverse hiring standards and this kind of thing. So that's been encouraging, but our big campaign goal is the community benefits agreement for the actual cleanup that's we hope to get in place in the next 2 to 3 years. And then this issue, I didn't talk too much about the different impacted communities yet, but as you can imagine, since time immemorial, people have been staying down by the river, right? And accessing the river, for basic needs, for fish and for water and that kind of thing. So ever since people settled here, since the tribal people, the bands and the tribes from this area, the Chinook and other tribes and bands were displaced from the areas, still there are Native folks from those tribes and from other tribes who were forced to relocate to this area that access the river for cultural resource needs, for access to harvest their first foods, and for practicing cultural traditions like canoeing in the river, or water ceremonies, for example. So all of these are kind of ways that the Native communities interact. And I mentioned the treaty rights. So there's actual treaty rights that are being violated currently because the fish are not safe, and there's I guess they're not on the endangered list, for example, but like lamprey, eels, and salmon are suffering, right? And pollution is a big part of it. Also, climate change is a big part, and dams are a big source of the problem, because they slow the flow of the water, and so the water temperature rises, and then you get that algae problem that someone referred to. But the contamination primarily affects the resident fish that are not the native fish to this area. They're the fish that hover in one general area. They maybe go from the Columbia Slough to the lower Willamette to the Columbia, but like by and large, they're kind of in this area, and they eat the critters at the bottom of the river that sit in the toxic sediment. And then, the PCBs accumulate in their bodies. And then when birds of prey eat those fish, or when people consume those fish, it becomes a really serious health concern. So if a woman of childbearing age or pregnant or nursing mother were to eat even a single resident fish, it could actually do some damage to the development of the fetus or the baby.
Mhm.
Just even one fish. So that's the issue at hand. But houseless folks, as you can imagine, for many generations have stayed down near the river and seek refuge by the river. And you know, there's constant sweeps of people along the river as well. And it just, you know, who are trying to survive. So that has come up, and we have worked with houseless community members who have these stories, and they've been part of the leadership of our group as well. So we try to highlight those issues because they're very real, you know, and it sort of gets at, it helps put into perspective what, you know, kind of the power dynamics at play, because, you know, oftentimes in the media, people experiencing homelessness are criminalized, you know, for this or that, or being the ones that are harming the environment. But when you think about it, the most serious concern that we're facing right now is on a whole industrial level, right? And the whole 100 years of contaminants that industry has put into the river over time, and that has settled at the bottom of the river. So slightly
Cassie,
different perspective. Yeah.
Cassie, there was a question from Dorman about global warming that you mentioned a moment ago. What will the rise of the ocean level, and he estimated at 70 feet by 2100, have on our rivers? And that may be, what do you think of that?
That's a fabulous point, Dorman. And that's why we're actually looking to do a climate resilience climate kind of resilience plan, if we can get some funding for it, that would involve, you know, experts around climate change to do some analysis around the river, and also how it would impact the Superfund site, but also how it would impact community folks over time. Because I mean, we feel that EPA has not caught up to, you know, the reality of what, you know, how fast and furious climate change is affecting all of us, and this particular area and the river. So you raise a really important point.
Cassie, what I kind of hear you saying is that, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the Superfund, the Portland Harbor Superfund, started 20 years ago, and that they're still just trying to figure it out, and that to have two community partners on the board that is considering the changes and what's going to happen is significant. It doesn't happen in most places to just have, you know, to have the community involved in the decision making is rare. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I think we have set a precedent for the Portland Harbor Superfund site, kind of maybe one of the highest levels for public involvement at large in the nation, I would say. I mean, I don't want to, you know, toot my own horn, but yeah, I think we have really, I mean, and it's not just Portland Harbor Community Coalition. There's lots of groups involved, but we are a collective, we are a coalition. So we have a number of groups that are members. But there is this, I'm going to put it here in the chat, Portland Harbor Collaborative. So this again was the convened by EPA and DEQ. So basically the community leaders around Portland Harbor demanded that EPA and DEQ co-convene a formal table, basically, kind of like a round table, to, again, you know, increase transparency and accountability and oversight around the cleanup process. So this just kicked off maybe 9 months ago and was designed by community leaders. And they meet on a quarterly basis, or we meet on a quarterly basis, and anyone can join as a member, whether you're an organization or an individual, you can join. Usually, basically, they have open public convenings every 3 months, and there's a steering committee, and so they invite folks to basically set the agenda for how. And currently, there's maybe 5 community folks on that steering committee that set the agenda for these quarterly meetings. So that's another forum and a way for folks to get involved. Our coalition has monthly meetings, and we we just had a meeting last Thursday, and I can give you some examples of share with you who we had at our meeting. So our last meeting, we invited the leaders from the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition to come and speak, to talk about how to organize across state lines. They currently, the river that cuts through Seattle, the Duwamish River, and they have been involved probably around the same period of time that we have been. Their process has moved a little. They are maybe 2 years ahead of us in their cleanup process, but they are under a triple threat right now. It's a really scary time for Duwamish leadership, because community leaders, because a lot of their good work that they've accomplished over the last 10 years is under threat right now, because there's 3 different attempts by EPA to kind of reduce cleanup levels. So they have I'll put their name in the chat as well, but they have a website. It's worth, and they have a petition on their website. And so we were strategizing about what do we do to support them, and then how can they support us. And then also we had some researchers from the University of Iowa, where there's a Superfund research center, come and talk about their new innovative proven technology for how to sample PCBs in the air, and how they have used this model that's very efficient and affordable and easy, and can monitor air quality in terms of PCBs and exposure to people over a 4-month period of time, by using this tiny little sponge they put in a metallic things, and they post it on gates near rivers or poles or whatever, and then they just kind of collect data. And so they're community folks express a lot of interest in working with them. So we're going to be exploring how can we test out, some of this technology here at this site. And Duwamish folks were like, hey, that could be really helpful for us too. And also for folks who, spend time in the Columbia River Basin, in the gorge, there is a new Superfund site that just got designated for Bradford Island, which is near the Dalles. It's an island in the river. And the PCB levels there are way higher than Portland Harbor. And it affects the fish, and people do fish over there. So, Yakima Nation and Columbia River Keepers were the ones really driving that process, and they finally got that designated as a Superfund site. So that's a big deal, and we'll be collaborating with them probably as well. But here's our contact information. I think we lost track of time.
Yeah, we're going to have to close up, but that's okay. We've been taking questions all through, so it's worked out great. Yeah, thank you for your good work. And so your the contact information was there, and this is going to be recorded and available on our website too. For members can find that information there.
Fabulous.
But
Thank you so much.
Cassie, thank you for your good work. I have learned so much. We're going to have a silent applause because of our virtual format here. I wish you could hear the loud applause that are coming over the airwaves. I've learned so much from your program. I had no idea that there was so little community involvement unless community members volunteered and took up the cause. So thank you for your good work of several decades now. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Really grateful to speak today.